My name is Carolyn, and I'm 47 years old. The moment my father grabbed that microphone at my son's wedding reception, I knew something terrible was about to happen. 200 guests fell silent as he cleared his throat, champagne glass raised high. Instead of the warm toast I'd foolishly hoped for, his words cut through the ballroom like shattered glass. Well, I suppose even the family embarrassment can raise a decent kid. The collective gasp was deafening. My son Jacob's face turned crimson. My mother looked away, pretending to adjust her necklace. My husband Dennis grabbed my trembling hand under the table. Decades of belittlement flashed before my eyes in that single, agonizing moment. But that public humiliation? It was about to become his biggest mistake. Before we dive into how I brought down my father's empire, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever felt underestimated by your own family, and subscribe because this story takes turns you won't believe. Trust me, what happened next changed everything. Growing up in our Connecticut suburb felt like living in a beautiful prison. My father, Richard Crawford, was a wealthy real estate developer who treated life like a business transaction, every relationship calculated for maximum return on investment. My mother, Margaret, played her role perfectly. The submissive wife who never questioned his decisions, never defended her daughter when it mattered most. Then there was Preston, my younger brother by 3 years, who could do absolutely no wrong in our father's eyes. Every mediocre accomplishment Preston achieved was celebrated like he'd won a Nobel Prize, while my genuine achievements vanished into a void of indifference. I remember being 16, winning the state debate championship after months of preparation. I stood on that stage, holding the trophy, scanning the audience for my father's face. He wasn't there. He was at Preston's baseball game, watching my brother sit on the bench for 9 innings without playing a single moment. When I got home that night, trophy in hand, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. "That's nice, Carolyn," he muttered, then turned to Preston. "Tell me about the game, son. Did you get any action?" Preston hadn't even left the dugout, but they spent an hour analyzing plays he'd watched from the sidelines. 2 years later, I received my acceptance letter from Brown University with a full academic scholarship. I ran downstairs, heart pounding with pride, thinking this would finally be the moment he'd see me. My father read the letter, handed it back, and said words I'll never forget. "Why not Harvard? Preston will get in there." Preston barely graduated high school with a 2.1 grade point average, but somehow in my father's twisted reality, he was destined for Ivy League greatness that never materialized. I paid my own way through Brown, working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, determined to prove I was worthy of something, anything. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in economics, walked across that stage with highest honors, and my father's response was to pat me on the shoulder and say, "Nice participation trophy, sweetheart." Meanwhile, Preston dropped out of community college after 1 semester, and my father bought him a luxury sports car as encouragement to find his path. The double standard wasn't subtle. It was a canyon I could never cross, no matter how high I jumped or how hard I worked. Every milestone in my life was minimized, dismissed, or ignored entirely, while Preston's failures were repackaged as character-building experiences that proved his depth and potential. I met Dennis when I was 24, working at a financial consulting firm in Hartford. He was an accountant, kind and steady, with warm eyes that actually saw me for who I was, not who I failed to be in someone else's estimation. He came from a middle-class family that laughed together at dinner, where accomplishments were celebrated equally and love wasn't a competition. When I brought him home to meet my parents, my father's disapproval was immediate and withering. "You're settling," he told me in the kitchen while Dennis chatted with my mother in the living room. "This is beneath your potential. Preston will marry someone impressive." I married Dennis anyway, in a small ceremony my father attended with the enthusiasm of someone fulfilling an unpleasant obligation. At 26, I had Jacob, and I swore he would never feel what I felt growing up. I poured every ounce of love I'd been denied into that beautiful baby boy. My father barely acknowledged his existence. He sent a generic card and a savings bond, then didn't visit for 6 months. But when Preston had his daughter Luna 2 years later, Richard threw a massive celebration, rented out a country club, invited 200 people, and gave a speech about the joy of grandparenthood that made my stomach turn. Jacob was standing right there, not yet 3 years old. invisible to the grandfather who was sobbing with joy over Preston's baby. The pattern continued for 21 years. Every birthday, every holiday, every achievement of Jacob's was met with polite distance from my father, while Luna received extravagant gifts and dedicated attention. I watched my son's face slowly learn what I'd learned, that love in this family was arbitrary and cruel, distributed based on genetics and favoritism rather than merit or need. I tried to shield him, to make up for it with my own love, but children know when they're being rejected, even when you try to hide it. When Jacob got engaged to Haley, his college sweetheart who was brilliant and kind and perfect for him, I wanted to give them the wedding of their dreams. Dennis and I spent $60,000 wed, saved for years, making sure every detail was perfect. My father contributed nothing but demanded a prominent role in the ceremony because, as he put it, people expect the grandfather to be involved. I bit my tongue, smiled, and told myself it would be fine. It was Jacob's day, and I wouldn't let old wounds ruin it. That decision, that choice to stay silent one more time, set the stage for the devastation that would finally break me open. The morning of Jacob's wedding dawned clear and beautiful, sunlight streaming through the windows of the bridal suite where I was helping Haley into her dress. She looked radiant, and watching her spin in front of the mirror, I felt tears welling up, thinking about the family she was joining, hoping we were enough despite the toxicity that lurked around the edges. Jacob found me in the hallway before the ceremony, pulled me into a tight hug and whispered, "Mom, you're my hero. Everything I am, every good thing in me, comes from watching you be strong my whole life." Those words filled me with a warmth I'd spent decades searching for, validation from the person who mattered most. The ceremony was breathtaking. Jacob and Haley exchanged vows that'd written themselves, promising partnership and equality and unwavering support, everything I'd taught my son about what real love looked like. Walking down the aisle on Dennis' arm, I felt proud, genuinely happy, like maybe all the pain had been worth it to raise this exceptional young man who knew how to love someone properly. The reception started perfectly. Dinner was elegant, the band played beautifully, and guests mingled and laughed, celebrating the beginning of this new marriage. Then my father arrived, fashionably late as always, already drunk judging by his unsteady gait and too loud voice. My mother Margaret trailed behind him, her face set in that neutral expression she'd perfected over decades of managing his moods. Preston showed up with his family, and the smirk on my brother's face when he saw me made my stomach clench. He loved these family gatherings, opportunities to watch our father's favoritism play out in real time, validating his position as the chosen one. The toasts began after dinner. Haley's parents spoke lovingly about their daughter and welcomed Jacob into their family with genuine warmth. Dennis gave a heartfelt speech about watching Carolyn pour herself into raising Jacob, about the sacrifices she'd made and the love she'd given, and how proud he was of both of them. Guests dabbed their eyes. Jacob squeezed my hand, and I thought maybe, just maybe, the evening would end without incident. Then Richard stood up, grabbing the microphone from the MC without being invited to speak. "Well," he began, swaying slightly, his words slurring at the edges. "I suppose even the family embarrassment can raise a decent kid, though I suspect the boy got his sense from his father's side." The room went silent, forks freezing halfway to mouths, conversations dying mid-sentence. He continued, emboldened by the attention or the alcohol or the decades of unchecked cruelty that no one had ever stopped. "My daughter Carolyn never quite made it to the top firm, married a simple accountant, lives in a modest house in a modest neighborhood, but my son Preston now has the success story this family can be proud of." He went on for 5 excruciating minutes, listing every way I'd disappointed him, every standard I'd failed to meet, comparing me unfavorably to Preston at every turn, painting a picture of my life as a series of mediocre choices and missed opportunities. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some actually stood up and left the room, unable to stomach what they were witnessing. Haley's mother put her hand over her mouth in shock. Jacob stood up, his face flushed with anger, and said, "Grandpa, that's enough. Sit down." But Richard just laughed and snapped back, "Sit down, boy. You're just like her, too sensitive, can't handle the truth." Dennis finally crossed the room and physically took the microphone from Richard's hand, his voice shaking with controlled fury. "That's enough, Richard. This is your grandson's wedding, not your platform for cruelty." But the damage was done. the words already out there, hanging in the air like poison. Richard just laughed. That same dismissive chuckle I'd heard my entire life. "Truth hurts, doesn't it?" he said, stumbling back to his table, where my mother sat in mortified silence, unwilling to defend me even in this moment of ultimate public humiliation. I ran to the bathroom, my vision blurring with tears, my chest so tight I couldn't breathe. I'd endured 47 years of this treatment in private, but this was different. This was in front of 200 people, at my son's wedding, the day that was supposed to be perfect and filled with joy. My best friend Diana found me sobbing against the sink, mascara streaking my face, my whole body shaking. "Don't let him win," she said fiercely, gripping my shoulders. "Not today, Carolyn. You get back out there and you hold your head high for Jacob." I splashed water on my face, fixed my makeup as best I could, and walked back into that reception with a smile plastered on my face that felt like broken glass. I danced with Jacob, I posed for photos, I cut the cake and gave a gracious thank you speech, all while something fundamental inside me cracked and shifted. The ride home was silent, Dennis gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "Finally," he said. "We don't have to see them again, we can be done." But I shook my head, a strange calm settling over me. "Oh, I'm going to see them," I said quietly. "But not how they expect." The week after, the wedding felt like drowning in slow motion. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just replayed that microphone moment over and over, hearing his words echo in my head, seeing the faces of 200 guests watching my humiliation. Jacob called 3 days later, his voice heavy with guilt. "Mom, I'm so sorry Grandpa ruined our day. Haley's parents keep asking if you're okay. I told them you were strong, but I know it hurt." I reassured him, promised him I was fine, that his wedding had been beautiful despite the ugly moment, but privately I was unraveling, coming apart at seams I didn't know existed. Then I got an unexpected phone call from a woman named Ruth Sinclair, an attorney who worked with Dennis' firm on occasion. She'd seen the video, someone had filmed my father's toast, and it had spread through local social circles like wildfire, a cautionary tale about family cruelty. Ruth asked to meet for coffee, said she had information I needed to hear. I almost said no, wanting to hide from the world, but something in her voice made me agree. We met at a quiet cafe in West Hartford, and Ruth got straight to the point. "I saw what happened at your son's wedding," she said, sliding her coffee cup between her hands. "And I want you to know, your father is not the man he pretends to be." She explained that 20 years ago she'd worked as a junior attorney for a firm that handled some of Richard's real estate transactions. What she'd seen during that time had disturbed her enough to keep copies of documents when she left the firm, insurance against a man she knew was dangerous. "Your father has been involved in fraudulent real estate deals for decades," Ruth said, pulling out a folder thick with papers. "Bribery, tax evasion, falsified loan applications, properties purchased with money obtained through illegal means. I kept these documents because I knew someday they might matter. When I left that firm, your father threatened to destroy my legal career if I ever spoke about what I knew. He has power, connections, and a ruthless streak that most people never see." I stared at the documents spread across the table, seeing my father's signature on papers that detailed schemes and payoffs, seeing evidence of a criminality that somehow didn't surprise me at all. A man capable of treating his daughter with such sustained cruelty was certainly capable of treating strangers even worse. Ruth leaned forward, her eyes intense. "I've been waiting for the right moment, the right person to help bring him down. After seeing what he did to you, I think you're that person. Men like Richard Crawford don't stop until someone stops them." I drove home in a daze, Ruth's words bouncing around my skull. I pulled out old photo albums, looking for evidence of something I'd lost, or maybe never had. There was my 10th birthday. The one my father forgot because he was throwing Preston a party for getting a participation trophy in youth soccer. There was my college graduation, me in my cap and gown with Dennis and my mother, my father conspicuously absent because Head had golf plans he wouldn't cancel. There was a photo from the hospital after I miscarried at 28, my face swollen from crying, and I remembered my father saying, "You'll have others, stop being so dramatic. Women deal with this all the time." I called Ruth back that evening. "Tell me everything," I said, and she did. the statute of limitations hadn't expired on several of the incidents. More importantly, Richard's current wealth, everything he'd built his empire on, was tied up in properties purchased with illegally obtained funds. If exposed properly, if the evidence was presented to the right authorities, he could lose everything. But we needed more than what Ruth had. We needed current documentation, proof that the schemes were ongoing. "Your mother handles your father's files," Ruth said carefully. "She organizes his home office, processes his paperwork. If we could get her cooperation, we'd have everything we need." But approaching Margaret felt impossible. She'd been Richard's enabler for 45 years, had chosen him over me at every critical juncture, had watched him destroy me emotionally and never once intervened. Still, I decided I had to try, had to see if there was any shred of motherhood left in her that might respond to truth. I drove to my parents' mansion in Greenwich on a Thursday afternoon, telling myself I was doing this for all the right reasons, that maybe my mother would finally choose me if I gave her the chance. She answered the door, looking nervous, glancing over her shoulder. "Your father is at the club," she said, ushering me inside quickly. "He doesn't know you're here." Perfect timing, I thought, following her into the pristine living room that always felt more like a museum than a home, every surface perfect and cold and designed for display rather than comfort. I sat on the edge of the white sofa, choosing my words carefully. "Mom, what Dad said at the wedding, did it bother you at all?" "Even a little." Margaret's face tightened, and she smoothed her skirt with practiced hands. "Your father was just having fun, Carolyn. You've always been too sensitive, reading malice into things that aren't meant that way. He loves you in his own way." The dismissal was so immediate, so reflexive, that it took my breath away. I pushed harder, desperate for something, anything. "Fun?" He called me an embarrassment in front of 200 people. He compared me to Preston like I was a failure. "How is that fun?" Margaret's voice took on an edge I recognized, the tone she used when defending Richard's indefensible behavior. "Well, honey, you have to admit Preston has achieved more in terms of traditional success. Your father just wishes you'd applied yourself differently." The words hit like a slap. My own mother, looking me in the eye, telling me I deserved the humiliation because I hadn't achieved enough in my father's estimation. I tried a different approach, knowing I was probably making a mistake, but unable to stop myself. "I've found some concerning documents about Dad's business practices, financial irregularities, possibly illegal activity." The change in Margaret's face was immediate and chilling. Her eyes went cold, her posture rigid. "What documents? Where did you get them?" I realized my error too late. My mother wasn't a potential ally, she was my father's guard dog, and it just revealed I was a threat. "Your father works very hard for this family," Margaret said, her voice hardening. "If you're trying to cause trouble because you're angry about his toast, that's vindictive and petty. I won't allow you to hurt him with baseless accusations." Before I could respond, Preston walked in from the hallway. He still had a key to our parents' house, treated it like his personal hotel, and apparently had been there the whole time, listening. Well, he said with that smirk I'd learned to hate in childhood. "The family embarrassment returns. Come to apologize for ruining Jacob's wedding with your crying and drama." I stood up, anger flooding through me. "I ruined it? Dad's the one who gave that speech." Preston laughed, crossing his arms. "Dad spoke the truth. You've always been jealous of me, Carolyn. Face it, you're mediocre at best, and you can't stand that I've always been better." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I heard your whole conversation with Mom. You're snooping into Dad's business because you want revenge for hurt feelings. That's pathetic." Then Margaret spoke, and her words destroyed any remaining hope I'd had for our relationship. "Richard needs to know if his own daughter is being disloyal," she said to Preston. "Call him." Preston pulled out his phone, grinning. "With pleasure." Before he could dial, he looked at me one more time and delivered a blow that made everything else pale in comparison. "You know why Dad never loved you, Carolyn? Because you remind him of his sister Judith, who killed herself when he was 25. You have her eyes, her mannerisms, her weakness. It upsets him to look at you. You're a walking reminder of his greatest failure." I stumbled back, the room spinning. My father had a sister who died? No one had ever mentioned this. Margaret's face confirmed it was true. Richard's sister was unstable, she said quietly. Judith struggled with depression, couldn't handle life's pressures. You do have her eyes. It's always bothered him. I was rejected my entire life, denied love and acceptance because I resembled a dead woman my father couldn't save. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Preston moved toward the door, blocking my exit. Now get out, he hissed. And if you try anything against Dad, if you pursue whatever conspiracy theory you're building, well, make sure Jacob knows what a vindictive, unstable mother he has. Well, tell him you're having a breakdown, that you need psychiatric help. Hell, believe us, and you'll lose him too. The threat against my son, the one pure relationship in my life, was the line I couldn't allow them to cross. I left that house, hands shaking so badly I could barely start my car. I called Ruth from the parking lot of a grocery store 3 miles away, barely able to speak through tears. They're all against me. I choked out, even my mother, especially my mother. Ruth's voice was steady, an anchor in the storm. Then we do this the hard way, she said. And we make sure they can't see us coming. For 2 weeks, Ruth and I worked in secret, meeting in her law office after hours, spreading documents across the conference table like pieces of a massive puzzle. What we discovered was staggering. Richard's empire wasn't built on shrewd business acumen. It was a house of cards, properties mortgaged multiple times, loans taken out against loans, money moving in circles designed to hide its illegal origins. At the center was a company called Ashford Development Holdings, which managed 12 luxury properties across Connecticut, all purchased with fraudulently obtained loans from a small bank in Rhode Island. The bank president, Bernard Whitley, had been Richard's college roommate at Yale. They'd maintained their friendship for 5 decades, and Bernard had approved loans for Richard without proper documentation, without the standard verification processes, creating a paper trail of corruption that wound through decades of deals. Ruth showed me emails, forged documents, wire transfers that made no legitimate sense. This is federal crime territory, she explained. Wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy, we're talking decades in prison if prosecuted properly. We had enough evidence to bring to authorities, enough to start an investigation that would topple Richard's empire. But I wanted more than legal justice. I wanted him to feel what Id felt at Jacob's wedding, that public humiliation, that moment when everyone sees you for what you really are and finds you lacking. Ruth understood. The Hartford Business Association Gala is in 3 weeks, she said. Your father is receiving their Businessman of the Year award. 500 people will be there, including every major business leader in the state. It was perfect, the ideal stage for his downfall. But we needed irrefutable proof, something so damning that no amount of influence or legal maneuvering could save him. I remembered my mother mentioning once that Richard kept a personal safe in his study, original documents he'd never digitized, insurance policies and sensitive files he didn't trust to computers or cloud storage. Getting access to that safe meant breaking into my parents' house, a line I'd never imagined crossing. When I told Dennis my plan, he looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Carolyn, that's burglary. We could be arrested. You could go to jail. I met his eyes, and he must have seen something there that scared him because his objections faded. So is fraud, I said quietly. So is tax evasion. Has been getting away with it for 40 years, destroying lives, taking what isn't his. I'm taking back what he stole from me. Dennis was silent for a long moment, then sighed. Then, I'm coming with you. We do this together. We planned carefully, waiting for the right opportunity. It came the following weekend when my parents were scheduled to attend Preston's daughter Luna's school play in Massachusetts, a trip that would keep them away overnight. But then Jacob called, and the ground shifted under my feet again. Mom, Grandpa called me today, he said, his voice confused and hurt. He said, you've been causing problems for the family, spreading lies about his business, that you're jealous of Uncle Preston's success. My father was already poisoning my son against me, already working to isolate me, to paint me as the villain before I could reveal the truth about him. Jake, I said carefully, do you believe that? There was a pause that lasted an eternity. I don't know what to believe, he finally said. Grandpa sounded really convincing. Mom, he said you've always had issues with the family. That you were embarrassed at the wedding and now you're lashing out. After the call ended, I sat on my bedroom floor and cried until I couldn't breathe. Dennis found me there, held me while I shook. "This is what he does," Dennis said into my hair. "He isolates his victims, turns people against them, so when the truth comes out, no one believes it. We can't let him win." I pulled myself together, wiped my face, and made a decision. Then we end this now. This weekend. No more waiting. Saturday arrived, and we watched my parents' house from down the street until we saw them leave for Massachusetts, Margaret in the passenger seat, Richard driving his Mercedes sedan. We waited another hour to be sure, then approached through the backyard, using the basement window I remembered from years of house-sitting. The alarm code was still the same. Preston's birthday. Because of course it was. The house was silent and dark, and creeping through those familiar hallways felt surreal, memories assaulting me from every corner. There was the staircase where Preston pushed me when I was 8 years old, sending me tumbling down 6 steps. I'd broken my wrist, but when my parents came home, Preston said I'd tripped, and they believed him. I got lectured about being more careful. There was the kitchen where my mother prepared Preston's favorite meals 3 times a week, while giving me whatever was left over. There was the dining room where I'd sat through thousands of dinners, listening to my father praise my brother while I faded into the wallpaper. Every room held ghosts of rejection, and walking through them now, as an intruder in the house I'd grown up in, felt both violating and liberating. Richard's study was exactly as I remembered, a shrine to Preston's mediocre achievements. Trophies lined the shelves, photos covered the walls, every surface dedicated to the golden child, while my accomplishments existed nowhere in this house. Behind the painting of Preston's college graduation, which was actually a purchased degree from a diploma mill because Head never finished college, was the safe. I tried the combination, my fingers shaking. Preston's birth date, month, day, year. It clicked open. Inside was a treasure trove of evidence. Original loan documents with clearly forged signatures, ledgers showing payoffs to inspectors and officials, handwritten notes detailing bribes and under-the-table deals. But what broke me was finding Richard's personal journal, decades of entries documenting his thoughts and feelings. I flipped to the entry dated on my birthday. Another girl. Disappointed. Had hoped for a son to carry on my legacy. My birth, the day that should have been celebrated, was recorded as a disappointment. I found the entry from my wedding day to Dennis. Carolyn married beneath her station. At least Preston will marry well and give me grandchildren I can be proud of. The entry from Jacob's birth made my hands shake. Grandson from my disappointment daughter. Hope the boy takes after Dennis' family, not mine. Perhaps he'll amount to something despite his mother's limitations. Decades of cruelty, documented in his own handwriting, proof that his rejection wasn't circumstantial or about my actual failings. It was decided before I could walk, before I could speak, before I had any chance to earn his love. I photographed every page, every document, my phone's storage filling with evidence of crimes and cruelty. Dennis was downloading files from Richard's computer when we heard it, the sound that stopped my heart. Headlights in the driveway, car doors slamming. They were back early. The play must have been canceled, or Luna was sick, or some twist of fate had brought them home hours before expected. We grabbed what we could, shoved documents back into the safe, and ran for the back door. We made it to the neighbor's bushes just as Richard and Margaret entered through the front, and we crouched there, barely breathing, watching through the window as Richard went directly to his study. His shout of rage carried through the glass. "The safe is open! Someone's been in here," Margaret's voice, high and panicked. "Are you sure you closed it properly?" But Richard knew, was already pulling out his phone. Minutes later, Preston's car screeched into the driveway. Through the study window, I watched them frantically checking the safe's contents, Richard's face purple with fury. "If those documents surface, I'm finished," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet night. "Everything I've built, gone." Preston paced the room. It was Carolyn. Had to be. She was asking Mom questions, snooping around. Who else would dare? Margaret wrung her hands. "What do we do, Richard, if she goes public?" And my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, love me, guide me through life, said words I'll never forget. "We destroy her first, completely." We make sure no one believes a word she says." The certified letter arrived Monday morning, thick and official, from Hartford's most expensive law firm. Inside was a lawsuit bearing my name as defendant, Richard Crawford as plaintiff, claiming defamation, slander, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He was suing me for $2 million, alleging it'd been spreading malicious lies about his business practices, damaging his reputation, and causing him severe mental anguish. The irony was so thick I might have laughed if I wasn't terrified. Dennis read through the document, his face growing darker with each page. "Hes trying to bankrupt us before you can expose him. Even if we win this lawsuit, the legal fees alone will destroy us financially. He knows we don't have the resources to fight something like this." I called Ruth immediately, and she confirmed my worst fears. "This is classic Richard Crawford," she said. "Offensive defense. He buries his enemies in legal costs, drags them through years of litigation until they're too exhausted and broke to fight back. I've seen him do it to business rivals, to former employees who threatened to expose him. It's his signature move. But Ruth had a plan. He doesn't know what evidence we actually have, Hes guessing, reacting out of fear. We need to accelerate our timeline. The business gala is in 10 days, we can't wait any longer." She contacted an investigative journalist Shed worked with before, a man named Griffin Shaw who wrote for the Hartford Chronicle and had been investigating Connecticut real estate corruption for 3 years. Griffin was intensely interested when Ruth laid out what we had. We met Griffin at a diner in New Britain, neutral territory where we wouldn't be recognized. I spread out my phone, showing him the photographs I'd taken from Richard's safe, and watched his eyes widen with each image. "This is bigger than one corrupt developer," Griffin said, making notes furiously. "Your father's network includes developers across 3 states, politicians, bank executives. This could bring down a whole system." He wanted to publish immediately, but I convinced him to wait for the gala. "Let him accept that award," I said. "Let him stand in front of 500 people and celebrate himself, then drop the bomb." Griffin agreed, but he warned me with eyes that had seen too many ugly truths. "Once this goes public, there's no going back. Your family will never forgive you. Your father will spend the rest of his life in prison if the prosecutors do their job. Your mother, your brother, they'll lose everything too. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about 47 years of rejection, about being called an embarrassment at my son's wedding, about the journal entries that proved I never had a chance. "They've never forgiven me for existing," I said. "I'm done seeking their approval." But Richard wasn't finished attacking. 2 days later, my boss Stuart called me into his office at Bridgeport Financial Group. "Carolyn," he said uncomfortably. "I received a call from Richard Crawford yesterday. He expressed concerns about your mental health, said you're going through some kind of breakdown, spreading delusional accusations about his business." My stomach dropped. "Hes worried about you," Stuart continued, "suggested perhaps you need some time off to get help." The implication was clear. Take stress leave, step away from your job, disappear quietly. I refused, insisted I was fine, but I could see doubt in Stuart's eyes, seeds Richard had planted taking root. That same day, Haley called, her voice worried. "Carolyn, I don't know how to say this, but Richard took Jacob to lunch yesterday. When Jacob came back, he seemed confused, said maybe you need psychiatric help, that Richard showed him evidence you're having paranoid delusions about the family. My father was weaponizing my own son against me, using Jacob's love for me to paint me as mentally unstable so that when the truth came out, no one would believe it. The manipulation was surgical, precise, devastating. That night, I had a full panic attack in my bathroom, couldn't breathe, couldn't think, the walls closing in around me. Dennis found me curled on the floor, hyperventilating. "I can't do this," I sobbed. "Hes taking everything. My job, my son, my reputation, everyone's going to think I'm crazy." Dennis sat beside me on the cold tile, held my hands until my breathing slowed. "Then we hit him harder," he said quietly. "We show everyone who the real monster is." Ruth worked her connections, discovering that Richard's fraud network extended even further than we'd known. Bank President Bernard Whitley, State Senator Hugh Morrison, and, shockingly, Preston himself were directly implicated in 3 specific deals from the last 5 years. My brother wasn't just Richard's favorite, He was his accomplice, actively participating in criminal schemes. When I learned Preston was involved, I felt a flicker of sympathy for his daughter Luna, 19 years old, and about to watch her father be exposed as a criminal. I called Preston, gave him one last chance. "Walk away now," I said. "Cooperate with authorities, and try to minimize the damage to Luna." Preston's laugh was cruel and dismissive. "You have nothing, Carolyn. And even if you did, Dad has judges in his pocket, connections you can't imagine. You'll never win against us." Then he twisted the knife deeper. "I've convinced Jacob you're having a breakdown. He's meeting with Dad's lawyer tomorrow to discuss options for having you evaluated, possibly committed if you keep making wild accusations. You're about to lose everything. And it's your own fault for being jealous and vindictive your whole pathetic life." The threat of being declared mentally incompetent, of potentially losing custody of my relationship with my adult son, was the final straw. I called Griffin Shaw. "Publish everything," I said, my voice steel. "Publish it now." But Griffin had a better idea. "The gala is in 4 days. We run the story that morning. Front page. By the time your father gets to that event, everyone will know exactly who he is. Maximum impact, maximum humiliation." It was perfect, cruel in the way it needed to be. Ruth secured a temporary restraining order against Richard's lawsuit, presenting enough preliminary evidence to convince a judge that the suit was frivolous and retaliatory. We spent 3 sleepless nights preparing, organizing documents, coordinating with Griffin's editor, making sure every detail was ironclad. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep at all. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Dennis' hand in mine, wondering if I was doing the right thing or if I was about to detonate a bomb that would destroy everyone, guilty and innocent alike. But then I remembered my father's voice at Jacob's wedding, remembered those journal entries, remembered 47 years of being told I wasn't enough, and I knew. Some families need to be broken, to be honest. The Hartford Chronicle landed on doorsteps across Connecticut at 5:30 Friday morning. The front page headlines stretched across the entire width of the paper in bold, damning letters. "Real estate mogul Richard Crawford's empire built on fraud, 4-decade scheme exposed." Below it was Griffin Shaw's byline and a photograph of my father at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, smiling that confident smile I'd known my whole life. The article was comprehensive, devastating, 10,000 words spread across 6 pages, with photographs of documents, quotes from victims, a detailed timeline of illegal deals spanning back to the 1980s. Griffin had done his job brilliantly. Had tracked down people Richard had defrauded. Small business owners who'd lost everything. Families who'd been displaced by illegal property seizures. Former employees who'd been threatened into silence. The article included my father's handwritten notes about bribing inspectors, emails coordinating illegal loans with Bernard Whitley, wire transfer records showing money laundering. But the most damaging part was the sidebar that detailed Richard's personal journal entries, including the one about being disappointed at my birth. The cruelty wasn't just financial, it was personal. A pattern of behavior that painted a picture of a man without conscience or empathy. By 8 in the morning, the story had exploded across every platform. Local television news led with it, radio stations discussed it, social media erupted with shares and comments. My phone was ringing constantly, messages pouring in from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some were supportive, praising my courage. Others were accusatory, calling me a traitor who destroyed her own father. But most were from victims, people saying thank you, people who'd been hurt by Richard Crawford and finally felt vindicated. Jacob called at 9, his voice shaking. "Mom, what's happening? The news is saying Grandpa is a criminal, that he's been running fraud schemes for decades. They're showing pictures of documents, talking about prison." I could hear Haley in the background, comforting him. "Jake?" I said gently. "I need you to read the article. All of it, including the parts about me, and then, well, talk." I hung up, trusting that my son would see the truth, praying I hadn't just destroyed the most important relationship in my life. Richard called at 9:15, and the rage in his voice was like nothing I'd ever heard. "You vile, ungrateful witch," he screamed. "I gave you everything, raised you, provided for you, and this is how you repay me? I will destroy you, Carolyn. I will take everything you have and everyone you love." But his threats were empty now. the desperate flailing of a man watching his empire crumble. "You already tried to destroy me, Dad," I said calmly. "For 47 years. My turn." I hung up on him, and the liberation of that simple act, of ending the call on my terms, was intoxicating. The FBI arrived at my parents' mansion by noon. Ruth had coordinated with federal prosecutors, timing the arrest warrants to coincide with the article's publication. News helicopters circled the Greenwich estate, reporters camped outside the gates, capturing footage of agents carrying boxes of evidence from the house. Margaret called me at 2 in the afternoon, her voice raw from crying. "How could you do this to your own father?" she sobbed. "He's being arrested, Carolyn. The FBI is taking him away in handcuffs. How could he do what he did?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "To all those people he defrauded? To me? For my entire life? You stood by and let him treat me like garbage, Mom. You chose him over me every single time, so don't ask me how I could do this. Ask yourself how you could have been complicit in his cruelty for 45 years. I hung up before she could respond, another small act of power reclaimed. Preston called in a panic at 3, the swagger completely gone from his voice. "The FBI wants to talk to me. They're saying I'm implicated in 3 deals, that I could face charges." "Carolyn, what did you tell them?" His fear was palpable, delicious in a way that should have made me feel guilty but didn't. "I told them the truth, Preston. Something you've never experienced. You had a chance to walk away, to cooperate. You chose to threaten me instead. Now you live with the consequences." He started crying then, actually sobbing into the phone. "Luna is devastated. Her friends are tearing her apart on social media. College classmates are posting about her criminal family. This is your fault, Carolyn. You did this to her." But I wouldn't accept that guilt. "No, Preston. You and Dad did this. You chose to commit crimes. You chose to enable his cruelty. Luna is suffering because of your choices, not mine. She's 19 years old and innocent in all this, and yes, I feel terrible for her. But that doesn't make what you did acceptable." As evening approached, I made a decision that Ruth advised against. The Hartford Business Association Gala was still happening. The organizers had tried to cancel, but the logistics were impossible on such short notice. Richard's award had been revoked, his name stripped from the program, but the event would proceed with 500 guests who'd paid $300 per plate. I decided to attend. Dennis thought I was insane, Ruth warned it could be dangerous, but I needed to be there, needed to face the world that had just learned the truth about my family. I wore a navy dress, simple and elegant, did my hair and makeup carefully, armor for the battlefield I was walking into. When Dennis and I entered the ballroom of the Marriott Hartford downtown, conversation stopped. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. I held my head high, walked to our table, and sat down. Then something unexpected happened. People started approaching me, not with judgment, but with gratitude. A woman in her 60s with kind eyes touched my shoulder. "My father lost his business to Richard Crawford's predatory practices 20 years ago. It destroyed him, led to his early death. Thank you for speaking up." A man in an expensive suit shook my hand. "He destroyed my commercial property company in 2003, used illegal tactics to force me out of the market. You're a hero for exposing him." One after another, victims of my father's corruption approached, sharing their stories, thanking me for finally ending his reign of financial terror. Jacob and Haley arrived at 7, and my heart stopped when I saw them crossing the room. Jacob's eyes were red from crying, but when he reached me, he pulled me into a fierce embrace. "I read everything, Mom. The article, the documents Griffin Shaw published online. I talked to Dennis, to Ruth. I understand now. And am so sorry I doubted you even for a second." Haley hugged me next, whispering, "You're the strongest person I know, Carolyn. What you did took unbelievable courage." We were standing together when the commotion at the entrance began. Richard walked in, defiant and desperate, with Margaret and Preston behind him. The crowd parted like he carried a disease. Head made bail, posted by some fool lawyer who still believed in him or his money. He spotted me across the room and walked directly toward me, his face twisted with fury. People stepped back, creating a circle of space around us. "You think you've won?" he hissed, standing inches from me. I built this empire with my bare hands. I'll rebuild it, and I'll make sure you pay for this betrayal for the rest of your miserable life. I looked at this man who was my father only in biology, who had rejected me before I could speak, who had spent 47 years making sure I knew I wasn't enough, and I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, just a calm certainty that I'd done the right thing. You built it on lies, theft, and cruelty. I said clearly, loud enough for the people around us to hear. There's nothing left to rebuild, Dad. Your properties are seized, your accounts are frozen, your reputation is destroyed, you're going to prison, and everyone finally sees exactly who you've always been. He raised his hand as if to strike me, and 3 security guards immediately moved in, grabbing his arms, escorting him toward the exit. He was screaming as they removed him, his voice echoing through the elegant ballroom. Ungrateful child! I should have disowned you at birth. You've destroyed everything. I called after his retreating form, my voice steady. You did disown me, Dad. Every day of my life. You just never made it official. The room erupted in applause, and I stood there, surrounded by victims head hurt, by my son and daughter-in-law who loved me, by Dennis Hode stood by me through everything, and I felt seen. For the first time in my entire life, people saw me not as Richard Crawford's disappointing daughter, but as Carolyn, the woman who'd stood up to a tyrant and won. The week following the gala was a whirlwind of media attention, legal proceedings, and watching Richard's world collapse in spectacular fashion. The FBI's investigation moved quickly, Bernard Whitley arrested and immediately cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. He gave them everything, every deal, every illegal transaction, testimony that buried Richard and Preston under an avalanche of evidence. State Senator Hugh Morrison resigned in disgrace, his political career over, facing his own criminal charges. Richard's assets were frozen by court order, every property seized as proceeds of crime. The mansion in Greenwich, the vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, the luxury cars, the investment accounts, everything. My parents were forced to move into a small 2-bedroom rental apartment in Stamford, their fall from wealth as dramatic as their crimes. Margaret called me 3 days after the FBI seizure, her voice hollow with shock. We have nothing, Carolyn. Your father sits in that apartment all day, staring at walls, barely speaking. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted? I thought about that question, really examined my feelings. I'm not happy you're suffering, Mom, I said honestly. I don't take joy in your pain. But I'm not sorry for telling the truth. Dad hurt a lot of people for a very long time, and he hurt me my entire life. You stood by and let it happen, defended him, chose him over me at every turn. This suffering you're experiencing? I've been experiencing it for 47 years. The difference is my suffering was undeserved. She hung up without responding, and I wondered if she'd ever understand. Preston lost everything too. His house was foreclosed, the property purchased with money from Richard's illegal enterprises. His wife Diane filed for divorce, taking their daughter Luna and moving back to her parents' house in Vermont. Preston was charged as a co-conspirator in 3 major fraud schemes, facing years in federal prison. He called me once, drunk and crying, saying I'd destroyed his life. I reminded him that Head participated in crimes, that Head threatened to turn Jacob against me, that Head been complicit in Richard's cruelty. He hung up, cursing me, and I blocked his number. But not everyone in the family turned against me. Luna reached out 2 weeks after the arrests, asking to meet for coffee. She looked exhausted, older than her 19 years, carrying the weight of her father's sins. Aunt Carolyn, she said, stirring her latte without drinking it. My whole life was a lie. Dad always told me you were the problem in our family, that you were jealous and difficult. But he's the criminal. He's the one who did terrible things. Tears streamed down her face, and I reached across the table to hold her hand. You're not responsible for your father's choices, Luna. You're a good person who got caught in the aftermath of other people's crimes and cruelty. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Can I still be part of your life? Even after everything my dad did to you? My heart broke and healed simultaneously. Of course, I said. You're always welcome. You're innocent in all of this, and you deserve family who loves you properly. She moved in with Dennis and me a month later, needing stability while finishing her sophomore year at UConn, and she became the daughter niece Eid never had. Richard's trial was set for September, 4 months after his arrest. Federal prosecutors offered a plea deal, 10 years in prison if he provided full allocution, confessing to all crimes and cooperating completely. He refused, his pride and denial still intact even as his world burned. His lawyer quit, unable to defend someone who insisted had done nothing wrong despite overwhelming evidence. Richard represented himself at trial, a decision that guaranteed his destruction. Meanwhile, my life transformed in ways I hadn't anticipated. My boss Stuart apologized profusely for doubting me, explained that Richard had been very convincing, and offered me a partnership at Bridgeport Financial Group. Other victims of Richard's schemes reached out, asking for help navigating the legal system, filing civil suits to recover their losses. I became an advocate for fraud victims, using my experience and my newfound platform to help others find justice. Griffin Shaw's article won multiple journalism awards, credited with exposing a major corruption network that extended far beyond one developer. He wrote a follow-up piece profiling me, titled "The Daughter Who Brought Down an Empire," focusing on the courage it took to expose family, on surviving decades of emotional abuse. Dennis read it aloud to me one evening, and I cried hearing my story told with compassion and respect. "You're famous," Dennis said, holding me. "People know your name now, know what you did." But I didn't feel famous. I just felt free. 3 months after the gala, I was subpoenaed to testify at Richard's trial. The prospect of facing him in court terrified me, but Ruth prepared me carefully, walked me through what to expect. The morning I testified, I dressed in a gray suit, professional and composed, armor against the trauma. Walking into that courtroom and seeing Richard at the defense table, looking smaller and older than I remembered, should have made me feel sympathy. Instead, I felt only resolve. When he saw me enter, his eyes flashed with that old hatred, and I knew he'd learned nothing, felt nothing, remained convinced of his righteousness despite everything. I took the stand, was sworn in, and the prosecutor asked me to describe my relationship with my father. I told the truth, years of belittlement and favoritism, the wedding day humiliation that had been the final straw. Richard's temporary defense attorney tried to discredit me, suggesting I was motivated by jealousy rather than justice. "Isn't it true you were jealous of your brother's relationship with your father?" he asked. I looked directly at the jury. "No. I was hurt by my father's treatment of me." "There's a difference. Jealousy suggests I wanted what Preston had. What I wanted was basic human decency and love from my own father. I never got it." The attorney pressed. "But you destroyed your father's life over hurt feelings, didn't you?" I shook my head. "I exposed crimes based on documented evidence. My hurt feelings are a separate issue, though they're valid." Richard exploded then, jumping to his feet and screaming. "You were always weak, always useless. I gave you everything and you were never grateful." The judge pounded his gavel, ordering Richard to sit down and be silent, but the outburst proved everything I'd said about his cruelty. The jury saw a man who called his daughter useless in open court, and they believed every other accusation after that. When I finished testifying, I walked out of that courtroom feeling lighter, like I'd finally put down a weight I'd been carrying since childhood. In the hallway, I encountered Margaret, looking aged and brittle, her designer clothes replaced with department store attire, her hair gray, where it used to be professionally colored. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked, her voice bitter. I considered the question carefully. "I'm satisfied that the truth is out. I'm sad it took this much destruction to get here." She looked away. "He was a good provider, Carolyn. He gave us a good life. And I realized she'd never understand, would never see that money wasn't love, that material comfort didn't excuse cruelty." "Money isn't love, Mom," I said gently. "You taught me that by never giving me either." I walked past her, leaving her with those words, and I didn't look back. The verdict came 4 weeks later after a trial that was really just a formality given the evidence. Guilty on all counts. 18 federal charges including wire fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy, and bribery. Richard Crawford was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, would be eligible for parole when he was 86 years old. He was also ordered to pay $57 million in restitution to his victims. At 72 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. Preston was sentenced separately, 6 years in federal prison with massive restitution requirements. Both men were led away in handcuffs, and I watched from the gallery, feeling no triumph, just profound relief. It was over. The man who'd terrorized my self-worth for 47 years would spend his remaining years in a cell, unable to hurt anyone else. 6 months after Richard's sentencing, I began therapy with Dr. Helena Torres, a psychologist specializing in family trauma and narcissistic abuse. Our sessions were difficult, excavating decades of pain I'd buried under competence and determination. Dr. Torres helped me understand that my father's rejection said everything about his limitations and nothing about my worth. "You spent 47 years trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it," she explained during one session. "The problem was never you, Carolyn. The problem was him. You were a child who needed a father, and he was a man who couldn't provide that basic human connection." Working through the trauma revealed patterns I hadn't recognized. I'd spent my entire adult life proving myself, achieving, excelling, unconsciously still trying to earn Richard's approval even after I'd consciously given up. I'd poured everything into Jacob, determined he'd never feel what I felt, sometimes to the point of anxiety that kept me awake nights. Dr. Torres helped me see that my kindness wasn't weakness, that my empathy wasn't a flaw, that every quality Richard had denigrated was actually a strength. My relationship with Jacob deepened as I learned to be more honest with him about my past. He asked questions about my childhood, and I told him stories I'd hidden to protect him from the ugliness. "I never want to be like him, Mom," Jacob said one evening over dinner. "Teach me how to be better, how to make sure I never hurt people the way he hurt you." And I told him, the most important thing I'd learned. Love your children for who they are, not who you want them to be. See them, really see them, and value what makes them unique, rather than trying to mold them into some predetermined image. Haley announced her pregnancy 3 months after the trial ended. I was going to be a grandmother, a role I'd never really seen modeled properly, given Richard's dismissal of Jacob. The joy was mixed with fear. What if I'm like him? I asked Dennis late one night, my hand on Haley's barely showing belly. What if I damage my grandchild the way he damaged me? What if that cruelty is genetic, passed down like eye color? Dennis took my face in his hands. "You're nothing like him, Carolyn. You've spent your whole life being the opposite of him. Your kindness isn't an act, it's who you are." Luna flourished living with us, her bright personality emerging as she healed from the trauma of watching her father's arrest and imprisonment. She changed her major from business to social work, wanting to help people who'd been victimized, like Richard's fraud victims. We cooked together, laughed together, had late-night conversations about family and forgiveness and building new patterns. "You saved me too, Aunt Carolyn," she told me one night. I was becoming like them, learning to value money and status over character. "You showed me a different way." I started a support group for adult children of narcissistic parents, meeting twice monthly at a community center in West Hartford. 20 people showed up to the first meeting, all carrying similar stories of being scapegoated, belittled, convinced they were never good enough. Sharing my story helped others find courage to set boundaries, to walk away from toxic family systems, to understand their trauma wasn't their fault. Watching others heal helped me heal, gave purpose to my pain. 1 year after the exposure, I received a letter from federal prison bearing Richard's handwriting. My hands shook, opening it, my heart pounding with old fear and new strength. The letter was brief and bitter. "You destroyed everything I built. I hope you're proud. You've taken a great man and reduced him to nothing. I hope you can live with what you've done to your family. No apology, no remorse, no acknowledgement of his crimes or his cruelty. Just blame and self-pity, the same patterns that had defined him my whole life." I sat down and wrote back, my therapist's voice in my head reminding me this was for my closure, not his understanding. "Dad, I didn't destroy what you built. Your choices did that. I simply told the truth about crimes you committed and cruelty you inflicted. I waited 47 years for you to love me, to see me, to value me as your daughter. I'm done waiting. I forgive you, not because you deserve it or because you've asked for it, but because I deserve peace. I'm letting go of the burden of being your disappointment. I was never the problem. Goodbye. I mailed it, feeling a weight lift that I'd carried so long I'd forgotten what it felt like without it. He never wrote back, and I was grateful. Margaret's outreach came 2 years after the trial. She'd divorced Richard, her lawyer explained, unable to bear the shame and wanting distance from his crimes. She called asking to meet, her voice frail in a way I'd never heard. We met at a neutral coffee shop in Fairfield, and she looked diminished, her former elegance replaced by obvious poverty and illness. I was wrong, she said without preamble. About everything. I chose him over you, and I lost both. I waited, not making this easy for her. I have pancreatic cancer, she continued. Stage 4. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less. I don't want to die without telling you. I'm sorry. The news hit me with complicated grief, anger at the motherhood failed me mixed with sadness for a woman facing death. Why now? I asked. Why not 20 years ago, or 10, or at my wedding, or at Jacob's wedding when he humiliated me? She looked into her coffee cup. Because I was a coward. Because it was easier to go along with Richard than to stand up to him. Because I was raised to believe a woman supports her husband no matter what, and I never questioned it. I'm not asking you to forgive me completely, Carolyn. I know I don't deserve that. I'm just asking if we can have something before I die. I chose a limited reconciliation, visiting her weekly as her health declined, helping with medical appointments, sitting with her during chemo treatments that we both knew were futile. We didn't become close, the damage was too deep, but we found a fragile peace. She told me stories about Richard's sister Judith, the woman I apparently resembled, and I learned that Richard's cruelty toward me came from his inability to process his sister's suicide. It didn't excuse anything, but it explained it. Margaret died 8 months after our reconciliation, her final words to me whispered in a hospice bed. You were always stronger than me. I inherited nothing. Everything had been seized by the government, but I gained closure. Preston was released from federal prison after serving 4 years with good behavior. He reached out through Luna, asking if I'd meet him. We sat in a park in New Haven. 2 middle-aged people who'd once been children in the same broken house. He looked worn down, humbled by prison and loss. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, staring at his hands. But, I'm sorry. For everything. You were right about Dad, about the business, about all of it. I was so invested in being the favorite that I became complicit in his crimes and his cruelty. I appreciated the apology, could see it was genuine, but I also knew I needed distance. I accept your apology, Preston. I hope you rebuild your life into something better, but I need boundaries. I need to protect the peace I've found. He nodded, understanding. Luna talks about you all the time, about how you've helped her. Thank you for not punishing her for my mistakes. We parted civilly but without plans to meet again, and I felt okay about it. Some relationships are meant to end. The final scene of this chapter of my life happened in Hartford Hospital, holding my newborn grandson for the first time. Jacob and Haley named him Dennis Jr., honoring the man who'd stood by me through everything. The baby was perfect, tiny and peaceful, wrapped in a blue blanket. Jacob stood beside me, beaming with pride and exhaustion. You're going to be an amazing grandmother, Mom, he said. I looked at this perfect tiny face, this new person who would grow up in a family built on love rather than competition, and made a silent vow. You will always be loved exactly as you are. I whispered to the sleeping infant. You will never have to earn your place in this family. Dennis wrapped his arm around me. Luna took photos, Haley smiled from her hospital bed, and I realized I'd done it. I'd broken the cycle of abuse, created a new legacy built on truth and genuine love. We made it through, Dennis said softly. I leaned into him. This man who'd chosen me when I didn't believe I was worth choosing. We did, and we're stronger for it. People ask me if I regret exposing my father, destroying what was left of my family. The answer is complicated, but ultimately clear. I didn't destroy my family. I freed myself from people who were destroying me. There's a profound difference between those two things. Some families are born from blood, biological connections that society tells us must be honored regardless of how toxic they become. Other families are built from choice, from mutual respect, from real love that sees you and values you for who you actually are. I finally have the latter kind of family, and I've never been more at peace. The family embarrassment became the family truth teller, and I've never been prouder of who I am. I stand in my garden now, surrounded by Dennis, Jacob, Haley, baby Dennis Jr., and Luna, watching them interact with genuine warmth and laughter, and I know this is what family should be. Not performance or competition, not conditional love based on achievement, but simple acceptance and care. The empire Richard built on lies has fallen, but the family I've built on truth stands strong. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to diminish you? How did you find the courage to set boundaries with toxic people? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because your story matters too. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about overcoming family trauma and finding strength in the hardest moments. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone in dealing with difficult family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that your worth is never determined by people who refuse to see it. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away from people who make us feel small, even when they're family. May you find the courage to protect your peace and surround yourself with people who love you for exactly who you are. Take care of yourselves, and remember that healing is always possible, no matter how long the hurt has lasted.